hope you had a good day today at least. And if not, I'm sorry. I am in my car. Yeah, so it's the only place with good air conditioning, and I didn't want to sit outside and do this. I'm on my lunch break, so. Alright, chapter 3 today. One day on his bicycle rounds at the zoo, Jan left Adam the elk to graze on the lawn and shrubbery and entered the warm birdhouse, redolent with moist hay and lime. There, a petite woman stood close to a cage, moving her elbows in mimicry of the birds as they preened and posed. With her dark wavy hair, compact body, and thin legs sticking out from the hem of her smock, she almost qualified for enclosure herself. Bobbing on a trapeze overhead, a wall-eyed parrot screeched, "What's your name? What's your name?" In a melodious voice, the woman piped back, "What's your name? What's your name?" The parrot leaned down and eyed her hard, then turned its head and fixed her with the other eye. "Good day," Jan said. Dzień dobry? It's the way Poles began most polite verbal exchanges. She introduced herself as Magdalena Gross, a name Jan knew well, since Gross sculptures were commissioned by wealthy Poles and international admirers alike. He didn't know she sculpted animals, but then neither did she before that day. Later she'd tell Antonia that when she first visited the zoo, she'd been so captivated that her hands had started molding air. So she decided to bring her stools and to go on safari, and fate led her to that enclosure with the birds streamlined like futuristic trains. Jan kissed her hand lightly, according to Polish custom, said it would honor him if she considered the zoo her open-air studio, and the animals her fidgety models. By all accounts, tall, slender, fair Antonia looked like a Valkyrie at rest, and short, stark Jewish Magdalena vibrated with energy. Antonia saw Magdalena as a winning array of contradictions. Emphatic yet vulnerable, daring but modest, zany yet highly disciplined, someone excited by life, which may be appealed most to Antonia, who wasn't as stoic or solemn as Jan. The two women shared a passion for art and music, as well as the similar sense of humor. They were close in age and had friends in common. Thus began what would have become an important friendship. What would Antonia have served when Magdalena joined her for tea? Most Warsarians offer black tea and sweets to guests. And Antonia raised roses and jarred a lot of preserves. So at some point, she's bound to have prepared the traditional Polish pastry of soft donuts filled with a layer of pink rose petal jam and coated in an orange glaze that smells of fire. Sounds kind of good. Magdalena confided that she'd been feeling stale and uninspired, her creative attic empty. When she happened by the zoo one day, she saw a shocking flock of flamingos strutting by. That was a tongue twister. Beyond them roamed a dream panoply of even stranger animals, fabulous shapes, and hues more subtle than any painter could mix. The spectacle hit her with all the power of revelation, and inspired a series of animal sculptures that would win international acclaim. The zoo looked magnificent by the summer of 1939, and Antonia began making elaborate plans for the following spring, when she and Jan would have the honor of hosting the International Association of Zoo Directors annual meeting in Warsaw. However, that meant pushing to the rim of awareness such seismic fears as "if our world's still intact." Nearly a year earlier, in September 1939, when Hitler had seized Sudetenland, a part of Czechoslovakia bordering Germany and populated mainly by Germans. France and Britain had acquiesced, but Poles worried about their own borderlands. German territory ceded to Poland during 1918 to 22 included eastern Silesia and the region formerly known as the Pomeranian Corridor, an act that effectively separated East Prussia from the rest of Germany. The important German Baltic port of Gdansk, Gdansk, I don't. It's Gdansk. You don't put a G in front of a D and expect it. I can't pronounce that. Forgive me. The important German Baltic port of, I'm going to say Gdansk, had been declared a free city open to both Germans and Poles. A month after he invaded Czechoslovakia, Hitler demanded the return of Gdansk and the right to build an extraterritorial road through the corridor. Diplomatic wrangling in early 1939 led to antagonism by March, when Hitler secretly ordered his generals to deal with the Polish question. Relations between Poland and Germany gradually disintegrated, and Poles awoke to omens of war, a horrifying thought, but not a new one. Germany had occupied Poland so often since the Middle Ages, and most recently in 1915 to 18, that Slavs fighting Teutons, 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 had achieved the status of patriotic tradition. Cursed by a strategic location in Eastern Europe, Poland had been invaded, sacked, and carved up many times, its borders ebbing and flowing. Some village children learned five languages just to speak with neighbors. War wasn't something Antonia wanted to think about, especially since her last experience of war stole both her parents, so she assured herself, as most Poles did, of their solid alliance with France, keeper of a powerful army, and Britain's sworn protection. Oh, God, I feel bad now, because I know how World War II went. Those poor people. Optimistic by nature, she concentrated on her fortunate life. After all, in 1939, not many Polish women could be thankful for a good marriage, a healthy son, and a satisfying career, let alone a wealth of animals she regarded as stepchildren. Feeling blessed and high-spirited, Antonia took Rice, his aged nanny, and Zoska, the St. Bernard, to the small popular vacation village of Regentovka in early August, while Jan stayed in Warsaw to oversee the zoo. She also decided to include Coco, an elderly pink cockatoo prone to dizziness who often fell off her perch. Because Coco had a nervous habit of plucking out her breast feathers, Antonia dressed her in a metal collar that acted like a megaphone for squawks, and hoped the fresh forest air, getting to eat wild roots and twigs, might cure her ills and return her colorful plumage. The by now full-grown lynxes had stayed behind, but she charted along a new arrival, a baby badger named Orsinio. It means little badger. Too young to leave unattended. Most of all, she wanted to spirit Rice away from Warsaw, rife with talk of war, for one last summer of innocent play in the countryside, his and hers both. The Zabinskis' country cottage nestled in a forest hollow 4 miles from a wide gully in the Bug River, and only minutes from its small tributary, the Rosada. Antonia and Rice arrived on a hot summer day with the smell of pine resin in the air and waves of Acadias Acacias. Sorry. And petunias in bloom. It's a flower of some sort. The last ray of sunlight, lighting the tips of old trees in darkness already, fallen in the lower reaches of the forest, where the shrill rib music of cicadas. Yeah. That's what I was thinking that I was trying to say. Cicadas mixed with the descending calls of cuckoos and the whine of hungry female mosquitoes. A moment later, on one of the small verandas, she could submerge in the shadow of a scented grapevine, smelling of its own faint, hardly perceptible flowers, but nicer than a rose, than lilac and jasmine, than the sweetest smell, golden lupin from the field. While only a few steps through the overgrown grass stood the forest wall, towering, young green from the oak, slashed with white birch, and there she and Rice sank into the green quiet that seemed light years from Warsaw, a huge internal personal distance, not just miles. That actually does sound really, really beautiful. I actually can just picture them, in a nice meadow. Alright, without even a radio in the cottage, nature provided the lessons, news, and games. One popular local pastime involved going into the forest and counting the aspens. Each summer at the cottage awaited them with dishes, pots, a washtub, sheets, and a large surplus of dry provisions. And they provided the ensemble of human and animal characters that transformed it from bungalow to burlesque. After they settled the large birdcage stand on the veranda and fed the cockatoo bits of orange, Rice attached a halter to the badger and tried to persuade it to walk on a leash, which it did, but only in reverse, pulling Rice along at speed. Like the other animals in her circle, Badger warmed to Antonia, who preferred to call him her foster child, and taught him to come to his name, paddle with them in the river, and climb up onto her bed to nurse from a bottle. Badger taught himself to scratch at the front door to be let out for toileting, and he bathed sitting back in a washtub, human style, while splashing sudsy water against his chest with both arms. In her diary, she noted how Badger's instincts mixed with human customs and his own one-of-a-kind personality. Okay, so I'm totally imagining Niffler from the from Fantastic Beasts, and just sit. I know that's not what he looks like, but I just imagine him, sitting in a tub, bathing himself. Okay. Scrupulous about toileting, for instance, he dug one toilet hole on each side of the house, and galloped home from long walks just to use them. But one day, when she couldn't find Badger, she checked all of his usual daytime napping places. A drawer in the linen closet, between her bed sheets and duvet cover, in Rice's nanny's suitcase, with no success. In Rice's bedroom, she stooped to look under the bed, and glimpsed Badger pushing Rice's training potty out into the open, climbing onto the white enamel bowl and using it as it was intended. That's... Oh, that's funny. Near the end of summer vacation, Rice's friends Merrick and Zbyszek Zibsek? Rolling with it. Alright, they were sons of a doctor who lived on the other side of Praski Park. Stopped by on their way home from Hell Peninsula on the Baltic Sea. Full of chatter about the many ships moored in Gdynia Harbor, the smoked fish and sailing trips, and all the changes to the waterfront. Sitting in the dimly lit living room, while night slipped around her, Antonia overheard the boys on the porch steps talking about their summer adventures and realized that for Rice, the Baltic Sea he'd visited 3 years earlier probably existed only as a hazy memory that included the crashing surf and the glassy heat of noon sand. You won't believe how they've dug up the beach. Next year, there won't be a civilian on it, Merrick said. But why? Rice asked. To build fortifications for war. His older brother eyed him hard, and Merrick wrapped an arm around Rice's shoulder and said dismissively, But who cares about the beach? Tell us about Badger instead. And so Rice began stuttering a little at first, then developing animation and speed to tell of forest pirates and the shenanigans of Badger, culminating in the night Badger spilled a bedside bucket of cold water onto a sleeping neighbor lady he crawled into bed with, and the boys fell together, twitching with laughter. It feels good to hear them laughing, Antonia thought. But this perpetual splinter poking into Rice, the war, it's still a murky idea to him. He only associates words like torpedo and fortifications with toys. The beautiful ships he floats in bays surrounding the sand forts he built along the shore of the Rosada. And there's his enchanting game of cowboys. And Indians when he shoots pine cones with bow and arrow. But the other possibility of a real war, that he doesn't understand yet, thank heavens. The older boys believed, as Antonia did, that war belonged to the world of adults, not children. She sensed that Rice yearned to grill them with questions, though he didn't want to look stupid or worse, like a little kid. So he kept quiet about the invisible hand grenade lying at his feet that everyone feared might explode. What a subject to be broached by the innocent lips of children, Antonia reflected, glancing at the sun-bronzed face of the three boys, glistening in the light cast by a large oil lamp. Grazed by sadness about their safety, she wondered. Yet again, what will become of them if war begins? It was a question she'd been denying, sidestepping, and rewording for months. Our animal republic, she finally admitted to herself, exists in the busiest and most buzzing Polish city, as a small autonomous state defended by the capital, living behind its gates as if on an island cut off from the rest of the world. It seems impossible the waves of evil spilling across Europe could overwhelm our little island as well. As darkness began seeping into everything, erasing edges, a free-floating anxiety plagued her. Eager as she was to mend the fabric of her son's life, the instant holes formed, she could only await the unraveling. She meant the last ideals of summer to be well spent. So the next morning, she organized a mushroom hunting brigade, with prizes and honors for whoever bagged the most saffron milk cap bolidus, and button mushrooms, which she planned to jar. If war did erupt, spreading mushroom marinade on bread in winter would fill everyone with cottage memories of river swims, Badger's antics, and better days. They hiked 4 miles to the Bug River, with Rice carried piggyback at times, Zuska trotting alongside, and Badger riding in a knapsack, like Yoda. Stopping by meadows along the way, they picnicked and played soccer, with Badger and Zuska serving as goalies. The Badger battled fiercely over the leather ball once he latched onto it with his teeth and claws. Most summer weekends, Antonia left Rice with his nanny in the country and returned to Warsaw to spend a few days alone with Jan. On Thursday, August 24th, 1939, the same day Britain renewed its pledge to aid Poland if Germany invaded, Antonia made her usual visit to Warsaw, where, to her shock, she saw anti-aircraft sites ringing the city. civilians digging trenches and erecting barricades, and most disturbing of all, posters that announced an imminent draft. Only the day before, foreign ministers Ribbentrop and Molotov had stunned the world by revealing that Germany and the Soviet Union had signed a non-aggression pact. So I see this guy's last name is Molotov, and all I can think of is Molotov to cocktail. Getting sidetracked. The only thing dividing Berlin from Moscow was Poland, she thought. Neither she nor Jan knew of the pact's secret clauses already hacking up Poland after a two-stage invasion, divvying up its desirable farmlands. Diplomats are cagey. This might only be a bluff, she thought. Jan knew Poland hadn't the planes, weapons, or war equipment to compete with Germany, so they started talking seriously about sending Rice somewhere safer, to a town of no military interest, if such a place existed. Switzerland. They don't know that yet. Antonia felt as though she were waking from a long dream or entering a nightmare. Either way, a psychic earthquake. Vacationing far from the political clatter of Warsaw, cocooned in the calm level of order of the farmer's life, the harmony of white sand dunes and weeping willows, with each day enlivened by eccentric animals and little boys' adventures. It had been nearly impossible to ignore the world events, or at least stay optimistic about them, even stubbornly naive. I really want to keep reading chapter 4 now. So I'm going to do that. So, alright, we're on chapter 4 now. Chapter 4, Warsaw, September 1st, 1939. Just before dawn, Antonia woke up to the distant sound of gravel pouring down a metal chute, which her brain soon deciphered as airplane engines. Let them be Polish planes on maneuver, she prayed, as she went onto the terrace and scouted a strange sunless sky, veiled as she'd never seen it before, not with clouds, but a thick golden white gloss hanging low over the ground, like a curtain, not yet smoke, not fog, and stretching along the horizon from rim to rim. A veteran of World War I and a reserve officer, Jan had spent the night on duty, but she didn't know where, just somewhere outside the zoo, in the city canyons beyond the mental moat of the Vistula. She heard the hum of planes, tens maybe, even hundreds, that sounded like faraway surf, not a calm surf, but when waves crash onto the beach during a storm. Listening a moment longer, she detected the telltale, unsynchronized hum of German bombers that Londoners, late in the war, swore they heard grumbling, "Where are you? Where are you? Where are you?" Jan returned home by 8 a.m., agitated and with only sketchy information. "Those won't be the practice maneuvers we were told about," he said. "There'll be bombers, Luftwaffe squadrons escorting the approaching German army. We've got to leave right away. With Rice and his nanny safe in Regentowka. I think they're in the I think they're at the cabin or something. They decided to head first to the nearer village of Zlis, where his cousins lived, but waited for further updates on the radio. This was the first day of the school year for Polish children. A day when the sidewalks should have been streaming with school uniforms and knapsacks. From the terrace, they saw Polish soldiers sprinting in all directions, down the streets, over lawns, even into the zoo, erecting balloon barriers, aligning anti-aircraft guns, and piling long black cannon shells tapered at one end like animal droppings. The zoo animals seemed unaware of danger. Small fires didn't scare them. For years, they trusted the sight of household bonfires, but they grew alarmed by the sudden flood of soldiers because the only humans they'd ever seen in the early morning were the dozen or so blue uniformed keepers, usually with food. The lynxes began gargling, a sound between a roar and meow. The leopards chug-chugged low notes. Chimpanzees yipped. The bears brayed like donkeys, and the jaguar sounded as though it were hacking up something lodged in its throat. By 9 a.m., they had learned that, to justify invasion, Hitler had staged a phony attack on the German border of Gleiwitz, where SS troops, dressed in Polish uniforms, commandeered a local radio station and broadcast a fake call to arms against Germany. Although foreign journalists imported to witness the events were shown dead bodies of prisoners dressed in Polish uniforms as proof of hostilities, no one fell for the charade. Still, even such a hoax couldn't go unanswered, and at 4 a.m., Germany's battleship Schleswig-Holstein bombarded an ammunition depot near Gdansk, and Russia's Red Army started preparing to invade from the east. Antonia and Jan packed hurriedly and set out on foot across the bridge, hoping to make their way to Zlitz beyond the Vistula River and only a dozen miles to the southeast. As they approached Zwickau Square, the engine noise ground louder than planes floated overhead, appearing in the gap between the rooftops like stereo slides. Bombs whistled down and struck a few streets in front of them, with black smoke followed by the crackling of shattered stucco roof tiles and the rasp of brick and mortar crumbling. Every bomb creates a different scent, depending on where it hits. What it boils into aerosol, and the nose detects slipping apart as molecules mix with air and float free. Then the nose can pick up 10,000 distinctive scents, from cucumber to violin resin. When a bakery was hit, the rising dirt cloud smelled of yeast, sours, eggs, molasses, and rye. The mingled odors of cloves, vinegar, and burning flesh spelled the butchers. Charred flesh and pine meant an incendiary bomb that blasted houses with a hot, fast fire that the people inside had died quickly. Oh my god, that's awful. "We've got to turn back," Jan said, and they ran past the walls of Old Town and across the whistling metal bridge. At the zoo once more, Antonia noted, "I was so depressed that I couldn't do anything. I could only hear Jan's voice directing his staff. Bring a cart with horses, load it with food and coal, pick warm clothes, and go immediately." For Jan, the puzzle of finding a town of no military interest posed an equation littered with unknowns he wasn't prepared for. Since neither he nor Antonia had thought the Germans would invade Poland, they'd worried but agreed it was only fear speaking. A private siege, not signs of impending war. Antonia wondered how they could have guessed so wrong, and Jan concentrated on hiding his family somewhere safe, while he remained at the zoo to tend to the animals as long as possible and await orders. "Warsaw will soon be closed," he reasoned, "and the German army is advancing from the east. I think it's best if you return to the cottage in Regentauca." She pondered this, then decided, despite misgivings, yes, at least it's a place we know, one Rice associates with good times. Really, she had no idea, but persisted in packing and packing, relying on Jan's hunch, then climbed into a cart. Okay. I think there is an accident because two police cars just drove by and a fire truck. Oh, it's a funeral. Is it? My God, that is a lot. I think it's a funeral procession. It is. Okay, funeral procession. God, that was a lot. Sorry. Now I lost my place. Okay. Okay, yeah. Alright, so she persisted in packing, relying on Jan's hunch, then climbed into a cart loaded for what might be a long absence, and set out quickly before the roads grew too crowded. The resort village of Regentalca lay only about 25 miles away, but Antonia and a cart driver spent 7 hours en route to sharing the dirt road with thousands of people, mainly on foot, since cars, trucks, and most horses had been confiscated by the military. Women, children, and old men hurried along in a worried trance, escaping the city with whatever they could carry. Some pushing baby buggies, wagons, and hand trolleys, some hauling suitcases and small children, but most wearing several layers of clothing with knapsacks, bags, and shoes slung across their bodies or swinging from their necks. Flanking the road, tall poplars, pine, and spruce juggled large brown balls of mistletoe in their limbs, and black and white storks nested atop the telephone poles, still fattening up for their arduous flight to Africa. Soon farm fields quilted both sides of the road, grain glistening and tassels pointing skyward. Antonia wrote of Antonia wrote of sweat pouring in rivulets and breath bunching. The air clotted with dust. A storm's distant rumble became a cloud of gnats on the horizon. Then grew to German aircraft looming near in seconds, chewing up the skies, flying low overhead, panicking people and horses alike. Pelted by bullets, everyone hurried through the cloud of flying dirt. The unlucky fell, and the relatively lucky fled beneath splattering machine gun fire. Dead storks, redwings, and rooks littered the road along with tree branches and dropped satchels. Catching a bullet was a sheer chance, and for 7 hours Antonia beat the odds, but not without scenes of the dead and dying etched into her memory. At least her son, in Regentalca, was spared these images, so hard to erase, especially for a small child whose brain, busily sampling the world, was learning what to expect and stitching those truths in a place at a trillion connections. Stay prepared for this world the rest of your life. A child's brain tells itself, a world of mayhem and uncertainty. That which doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Nistek wrote in The Twilight of Idols, that which doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Nistek wrote in The Twilight of the Idols, as if the will could be annealed like a samurai sword that is heated and pounded, bent and reforged until it becomes indestructible. But the metal of a little boy, what does the pounding do to him? Mixed with Antonia's worry about her son was moral outrage that the Germans, in this modern war, so different from the wars we knew, allowed the killing of women, children, and civilians. As the dust settled, blue sky returned, and she noticed 2 Polish fighters attacking the heavy German bomber above a field. From afar, the geometry of the scene looked homely, like fierce wrens driving off a hawk, and people cheered whenever the fighter stung the bomber with tufts of smoke. Surely an air force that agile could repel the Luftwaffe. Sorry. Threads of tinsel flashed in the waning sunlight, and suddenly the bomber gushed a fountain of blood-red flames and fell to the earth in a sharp curve. Then a white jellyfish floated above the peaks of the pine trees, a German pilot swaying under his parachute, slowly descending through a cornflower blue sky. Like many Poles, Antonia didn't realize the magnitude of danger, relying instead on a Polish air force that boasted superbly trained and famously courageous pilots, especially those of the Pursuit Brigade defending Warsaw, whose outnumbered, obsolete PZL-P.11 fighters posed no match for Germany's fast, swervy Junkers, Ju-87 Stukas. Polish Karas bombers swooped low over German tanks at such a slow speed while flying level that they fell easy prey to anti-aircraft fire. She didn't know that Germany was testing out a new form of combined arms warfare, which would come to be called Blitzkrieg, lightning war. A change in with the everything you've got, tanks, planes, cavalry, artillery, infantry, to surprise and terrify the enemy. When she finally arrived in Regentkwa, she found a ghost town with summer guests gone. Shops shuttered for the season, and even the post office closed. Exhausted, rattled, and dirty, she rode to the cottage, hemmed in by tall trees and luminous quiet, in a setting that smelled familiar and safe, full of the mingled aromas of loam, meadow herbs, and wild grasses, decaying wood, and pine oil. One can picture her hugging Rice hard and greeting his nanny, eating a dinner of buckwheat, potatoes, and soup, unpacking, bathing, longing for the habitual routines of just another summer, but unable to calm her nerves or quell the sense of foreboding. Over the next few days, they often stood on the porch watching waves of German planes en route to Warsaw blacken the skylines in neat as hedgerows. The regularity addled her. Each day, planes swarmed above at 5 a.m. and again after sunset, without her knowing whom exactly they had bombed. The local landscape looked strange too, since God, the cottage, where the cottage is, you know what it is, wasn't a spot they visited in autumn without vacationers and pets. Tall lindens had begun turning bronze, and oaks the burnt maroon of stale blood, while some green survived on the maples, where yellow-bellied evening grosbeaks fed on weeded seeds. Along the sandy roads, staghorn sumac shrubs raised antler velvet twigs and cone-shaped clusters of hairy red fruits. Blue chicory, brown cat-o'-nine-tails, white dame's rocket, pink thistle, orange hawkweed, and goldenrod tuned the meadow to fall in a tableau that changed whenever a breeze bent the stems like a hand gliding over a plush carpet. On September 5th, Jan arrived by train, but his face somber to find Antonia very depressed and confused. I've heard rumors that a wing of the German army invaded from East Prussia. I've heard rumors that a wing of German army invading from East Prussia will soon reach Regentkwa, he told her. But the front hasn't arrived in Warsaw yet, and people are slowly getting used to the air raids. Our army is bound to protect the capital at all costs, so we may as well return home. Even if he didn't sound altogether convinced, Antonia agreed, in part because Jan was a good strategist whose hunches usually panned out, but she also thought how much easier life would be if if they could stay together, sharing comforts, worries, and fears. Traveling the main road again was out of the question. At night, they boarded a slow train with blackened windows and arrived in civil morning twilight, the hour of brightening before the sun spills over the horizon, in a lull between the night and dawn raids. According to Antonia, horses awaited them at the station, and they rode home bewitched by the everyday windless, calm, damp air, aster hedges, colorful leaves, squeaky axles, clopping hooves on cobblestone, and for a short spell, they slipped into the pre-mechanized past, sinking deep into pristine stillness where the war seemed to her muffled and unreal, only a remote glow like the moon. At the main gate in Praga, she took the toll. The toll smacked her wide awake again as she dismounted. Bombs had ripped up the asphalt, shells had bitten large chunks out of the wooden buildings, cannon wheels had furrowed in the lawns, old willows and lindens dangled unplugged limbs. Antonia held Rice tight, as if the desolation before her was communicable. Unfortunately, the zoo edged a river with busy bridges, prime German targets, with a Polish battalion stationed there. It had made a superb target repeatedly over several days. Picking their way through debris, they walked to the villa and its bombed, cratered yard. Antonia's eyes fell to the flower beds crushed from the hooves of horses, and she fixed on the small, delicate claxes of flowers stomped to the ground like colorful teardrops. Just after dawn, the day and battle started heating up. Standing on the front porch, they were surprised by the canyon echoing of horse explosions and snapping iron girders. Suddenly, the ground trembled and walked under their feet, and they hurried indoors, only to find the roof beams, floors, and walls all shaking. The moaning of lions and yowling of tigers spiraled from the big cat house, where she knew cat mothers, crazy with fear, were grabbing their young by the scruff of the neck and pacing their cages, anxiously looking for a safe place to hide them. The elephants trumpeted wildly, the hyenas sobbed in a frightened sort of giggle, interrupted by hiccups. The African hunting dogs howled, and the rhesus monkeys, agitated beyond sanity, battled one another, their hysterical shrieks clawing the air. Despite the uproar, workers continued to carry water and food to the animals, to check their cage bars and locks. In this Luftwaffe attack, a half-ton bomb destroyed the polar bear's mountain, smashing the walls, moats, and barriers, and freeing the terrified animals. When a platoon of Polish soldiers found the panicky bears, ribboned with blood and circling round their old haunt, they quickly shot them. Then, fearing lions, tigers, and other dangerous animals might escape too, the soldiers decided to kill the most aggressive ones, including the male elephant Jas, Zanika's father. Oh my god! I can't. Oh my god, that is so. Oh my god, that's so. That is horrible. Oh my god, I can't. Oh my god, this is sad. Watching from the front porch, Antonia had a good view across the grounds to where Polish soldiers gathered beside a well, with several zoo workers crowding around them and crying, others grim and silent. How many animals have they already killed, she asked herself. Events were unfolding without time to protest or grieve, and the surviving animals needed help, so she and Jan joined the keepers in feeding, doctoring, and calming the animals as best they could. At least humans can pack their essentials, keep moving, keep improvising, Antonia thought. If Germany occupies Poland, what will become of the delicate life form of the zoo? The zoo animals are in a much worse situation than we are, she lamented, because they're totally dependent on us. Moving the zoo to a different location is unimaginable. It's too complex an organism. Even if the war should erupt and end fast, the aftermath would be costly, she told herself. Where would they find food and money to keep the zoo afloat? Trying not to picture the worst scenario, she and Jan nonetheless brought extra supplies of hay, barley, dried fruits, flour, dried bread, coal, and wood. On September 7th, a Polish officer knocked at the front door and formally ordered all able-bodied men to join the army fighting on a northwestern front, which included 42-year-old Jan, and all civilians to vacate the zoo at once. Antonia packed quickly and traveled with Rice back across the river, this time to stay with her sister-in-law on the west part of the city in a fourth floor apartment, number 3, Capucin. God dang it, Capucinska Street. I'm gonna learn how to say that one. Oh my god, yep, because in the next chapter I'm gonna have to actually say it. So I'm gonna go try and learn that word eventually. Oh god. So we are now to chapter 5. We'll pick up with chapter 5 probably tomorrow. Maybe. That was intense. And I'm sad now.